Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Tami, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm grateful to be here this evening. Heck, I'm grateful to be anywhere this evening sober, that's for sure, because it wasn't always the case. I just want to start by thanking the committee for asking me to come out and share. It's always a privilege and an honor to share at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I did not come in here a rocket to stardom, and I certainly was the least likely, I think, that the old-timers might have picked as somebody who maybe would one day go on and have anything worthwhile to listen to. I can tell you my mom passed away 4 years ago, and she lived through my alcoholism, and thank God I was able to give her many, like 26 years of sobriety, and she told me when she was when she was on hospice, she told me that, you know, Tami, I also have a son that has 8.5 years sober, and she goes, you know, Tami, like, I'm ready to go, and I want to rest in eternal peace, and you've given me an opportunity to rest peacefully. And she said, and then we finally get you sober, and now my son was struggling, and he was able to give her 5 years of sobriety. But what I will say is that my mom never understood why any conference would pay for an airfare and a hotel to hear anything I had to say, and then she'd say, and why do those people want to hear that horrible time in our lives? So, you know, she never fully got it. But I want to thank the committee for bringing us out here. It is a privilege. And, you know, I know a lot of the speakers tonight, and we've shared the road a lot and a lot of microphones and time together, but we can tell when a conference is a well-run conference. And I want the Sunflower Roundup committee to know this is a well organized conference. You know, sometimes we get here and you're, you know, on your little carry-on rolling bag, and you're trying to pack like all your clothes and shoes and everything in this little bag, and then you get to your room and they have all these things that they want you to take home, you know, and we're giving them away at the last day because we can't take any of that stuff home. So a couple of weeks ago, we got this huge packet from this committee of all kinds of goodie from the local people in this area, and like, what a nice touch that was. I know you didn't get yours, Don, sorry, but no, I'm kidding. But, you know, just from all these little kind, flat-out things, and then I do want to really thank Jessica and Jessica and her beautiful daughter, Lyra. She picked me up at 1:30 in the morning last night, and my husband, who traveled with me, and my flight, unfortunately, in order for me to get home to where I live, we just relocated from Southern California to Northern California, and I live in this small little rural area, and we got this little rural airport. I have to leave at 5:30 in the morning when my flight leaves, so she will be getting up very, very early to take us home, too, and that's a big commitment, so I do want to thank you. We've had a really good time. And I want to acknowledge the other speakers. They're good friends of mine. I not only know them at conferences, I know them as people. I know their families, and they're good people, and so it's a privilege. Anyway, I'm going to start my story, and I do want to acknowledge my friend Lee Tapes. I'll just let you know now, people say it's name dropping. Don't really care. I got the mic tonight, but Clancy was my sponsor until he passed away 3.5 years ago. For those of you that knew Clancy, don't really care what your opinion is either, because I've heard varied views, but what I can tell you is he was the finest example that I had seen in the 30 years that I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. His primary purpose, not his secondary, not his tertiary, his primary purpose in life was, first, he stayed sober himself, and he dedicated 61 years of that sober life to helping other alcoholics, and he was certainly there. Thank you. That means a lot to me. I hear more stuff about Clancy, don't know if it's true or not, but, you know, I judge people based on my interactions, and he was there for me. He's there for my husband. My husband is with me tonight. I'm not, you know, you'll hear in my story, I didn't sober away a 21-year marriage. I mean, I didn't drink away a 21-year marriage. I sobered away a 21-year marriage. Because the same selfishness and self-centeredness that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with 30 years ago, I carried long into my sobriety. And when it was all about me and my drinking, me and child services, me in jails, and then when I got sober, it became me and AA, me and going back to school, me and my job, me and the people I sponsor, me speaking, me. And the same husband I abandoned in drunkenness, I went on to abandon in sobriety. And it wasn't until that fourth step process that I was able to see that. So I do get asked to speak, but if my husband doesn't come with me, I don't go, because I don't do that. You know, I don't need him sitting at home while I'm speaking. My husband was probably my favorite speaker in Alcoholics Anonymous, but sadly he was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer in 2020, and he's here with me tonight, and they had to remove his voice box and all that, so that voice has been silenced, and yet he just stands by my side and cheers me on, and that means a lot to me. Patrick will be celebrating 43 years of sobriety next month, so I want to acknowledge him. But most importantly, I want to acknowledge my friend Lee, who I think has a lot to do with me being back speaking. I took off 4 years of speaking when my husband got sick because I need to be by his side, not out on the road for sure. And you know, Clancy, wherever I was going through my sobriety, Clancy would meet me at the home group, the Pacific group, and he'd just walk up to me and he'd say, "Kid, come here a minute." And he'd pull something out of his pocket, and back then it was a tape, later it became CDs, and he'd hand it to me. And Clancy was very short on words, but very strong on message. And I'd go home that night and I'd listen to it, and whatever that speaker was sharing about it was something Clancy knew I happened to be going through. So we didn't have long phone calls, and we didn't meet for coffee, and we didn't trace and outline the book with a highlighter. He'd just get a speaker that he knew was sharing something I went through and got to the other side in sobriety with some kind of dignity and grace. Then he'd call me the next day, or I'd call him actually, and he'd say, "Did you listen to it?" And I said, "Yeah," and he'd say, "Good." And we didn't even talk about it. So, you know, I really want to acknowledge what a service my friend Lee does, because he travels all over the United States, a lot of times at his own expense, to come and tape all these different speakers. And I never buy the girls I sponsor, I don't buy them, you know, meditation books and book covers and gifts like that. I do the same thing. I buy them CDs of people that I know that speak, now they have the MP3 or whatever, and I say, "Here, listen to this," and I don't want to talk about it till you listen to it. So for some of you younger people in sobriety, listen to some of these people that walk the road before you. Anyway, I had my first drink when I was 13, and I've come to understand after reading this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, but I didn't understand that at 13. Heck, I didn't even know what an alcoholic was. I'm described in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, as an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated. I'm always more or less insanely drunk. So I'm like either sober or drunk. There's like no in between for me. I'm also described in AA vernacular. It's not spelled out in the book, so I can only share with you my experience. But in AA vernacular, I'm what we describe a person like me as a puking blackout drinker. There has literally never, ever been a time that I drank beverage alcohol that I did not puke my guts out. I do not like the taste of alcohol. I never liked the taste of alcohol. I know that offends a lot of people. Toward the end of my drinking, I used to have to plug my nose and uncap the vodka, and then I'd have to guzzle as much vodka as I could and just pray. And if I smelled the vodka before it stayed down and heated up my chest and produced that ease and that comfort that it did once it hit, you know what I'm talking about, when it hit that spot, I would puke it too soon. So I'd have to sit there with my nose plugged, just praying that it would heat up my chest and give me that goofy feeling in my head, and then I'd puke the whole thing up. I'm also described in AA vernacular as a blackout drinker, and again, I can only share my experience with that, but when I drink beverage alcohol, I will go into lapses of memory where I will do strange and incredible things that I would be mortified to do in a sober state of mind, only to feel that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization they talk about the next day in this book when people would tell me what I'd done the night before. But again, I didn't understand any of that phenomena. I didn't know what an alcoholic was. I had a pretty decent childhood up until about 9, but when I was 9, I had a mom, a dad, a sister, and we were well known in the community, and my dad was like the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he owned a local business. Both my parents were professional athletes, so they owned this big ice skating rink, and every kid in our little neighborhood either played hockey or took skating lessons from my parents. So we were just this really cushy, well-known, family in the community. But when I was 9, my parents went through this very acrimonious divorce. It was very public. It was due to an infidelity, so there was a tremendous amount of acrimony and anger. And I remember feeling at 9 years old that incredible selfish, self-centered fear that the whole world is talking about us and my family. So my solution to that, and they talk about it in the book, that we become kind of this actor and director of our own stage. I decided that I was going to become the bow on the package of this kind of like dirty, dirty little family that I perceived as a dirty family. So I became this like really intense little kid at age 9, and it's like I would go to school and I couldn't get a B, I had to get an A, and anything I did I had to do for perfection. I mean, I was just a really tightly wound kid. I mean, I probably needed a drink at 9. Anyway, back then, living in LA, I'm from Southern California. I've lived there 63 years of my life. We just moved to Northern California 2 years ago. And by the way, that's been a huge adjustment at 30 years sober. I left my home group. I left all my people. We learn things as we get sober, and my husband's now lost the ability to speak. So I've learned at 30 years sober that I'm actually very socially uncomfortable and really, really shy. I can talk at a podium in a room full of you, but one-on-one, I'm like the biggest goof. Ask my friend Rose. I just proved it to her like before the meeting and a few other people. I'm really shy and awkward, and that's something I'm working on with my sponsor, Pat. By the way, I do have a sponsor, Pat. She's amazing. She also comes out of the Pacific Group. And so we learn and we grow as we're sober. But anyway, back then as a kid, I had this self-consciousness that everyone was talking about us, and I had to be perfect. Well, back then, tennis was in its heyday. This was Wimbledon, and everybody played tennis. My parents were professional athletes, and they built this huge sports complex across the street from where I grew up. We lost our house in a divorce, and we had to move to this apartment. I was humiliated about that. And they had this huge tennis complex, and I would go over there after school, and there was a very famous ex-tennis pro that was put in charge of this tennis complex. It was like 20 courts. And I would go after and help him clean up every day after school. And like I was just this gooky little 9-year-old that showed up every day. Well, they started having these celebrity matches, and I just dressed myself in all whites and appointed myself the ball girl. And I'd run back and forth at the net and throw the players the balls. And I think he realized I was a troubled kid, and one day he saw me just hitting off the ball machine with a racket and ball, and he saw that I had some propensity for the hand-eye racket sport, and he started training me every single day at 9 years old. And by the time I was 12 and 13, I was winning all kinds of tournaments, not only like locally, but in the state of California. Unfortunately, a byproduct of my parents' divorce was that I had to start spending the weekends with my father. I was always afraid of my dad since I was a little kid. There was just this feeling, and he was really popular in town, and you know, he ran the local ice skating rink or owned it, and he did all these things for the community, and he was president of the Chamber of Commerce, but there was something about my dad that always frightened me. And those fears were founded when I started to have to spend the weekends with him. By the time I was 12, our stories disclose in a general way, so I'm not going to go into detail other than to say that if you were a girl and you had a budding teenage body, you weren't safe to be alone with my dad. My mom was struggling so hard to support us and put herself through nursing school, and my mom had had an attempted suicide right when my parents got divorced, and that played a number on my head, so I decided, like, I have to get straight A's. I can never tell my mom anything bad because she's all I got, and I was afraid of my dad, so I never told my mom what was going on between my dad and I. That had absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism, but it had a lot to do with the way I felt and perceived about myself, and more importantly, that became a badge of pride that I wore for many, many years when I was drinking. If you had a childhood like mine and you had a dad like mine, you'd drink too, and it gave me a right to drink in my own head. Anyway, by the time I was 15, I'm starting to really act out. I would be Good Girl Tami, and Good Girl Tami made straight A's, won all kinds of tennis awards, practiced and drilled beyond what any like 9 to 15-year-old should do. I didn't have friends at school. I didn't hang out. It was all about tennis, 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 and I had this dream that I'm going to become this world-famous tennis pro, and I'm going to make a ton of money and support my mom and my sister in the way that we deserved. And I really ran with that dream from 9 to 15. Well, at 15, I'm supposed to try out for the junior pro circuit. At 16, I'm really favored to make that. My tennis coach is realizing I'm not getting enough competitive play just at my local high school. But I think my first addiction was always books, and I was this like voracious reader. I would either play tennis or read books. So my tennis coach talked me into taking the GED exam, and I signed up for it just before my 16th birthday, and his hope was that if I take the GED exam, I can then enroll in a local community college and get a higher level of play. Well, right before I took that, he went and he talked to my mom about it, and he said, look, if she passes this test, would you be willing to let her leave high school and go into college? And my mom said, yeah. And he said, look, she's traveling all over every weekend. I'm taking her to all these local tournaments. I have a condominium with an extra bedroom. She's really, running away from home a lot when she has to go visit her dad. I don't know what the whole story is there, but if you want, she can move in with me and she can take this test and I can get her to college. And my mom was really struggling financially and thought that was a good idea. So at 15, I moved in with my tennis pro. I took that GED exam. It was like a 5-hour test, and a week after my 16th birthday, we received notification in the mail that I passed the GED. So my tennis pro walked me right over to a local college out in Los Angeles. I was good enough to play number 2 varsity string, and then he enrolled me in 12 units so that I could play on the tennis team. So at 16 years old, I'm living with a 40-year-old tennis pro. I'm dropped out of high school, and now I'm, kind of living this adult life. Well, for obvious reasons, I was a very precocious, sexualized 15-year-old, and sadly to say, after several weeks, I kind of became his live-in girlfriend also. And that whole story went down. Anyway, I played for this college for 2 years, and again, there was that good girl Tami, bad girl Tami. Good girl Tami was making the straight A's, winning the awards, everything was perfect, and once every couple months, I would just go off. And I'd have temper tantrums, and I'd run away, and I'd tear things down off the walls. And I'm sure a therapist can tell you it was built-in rage and all that from the stuff I suppressed as a kid. I don't get into that on the podium. But I would always go out and drink. And again, because I'm an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated, because when you're an athlete, I would eat kashi and yogurt for breakfast, and my body was a shrine because I was going to be a pro athlete. But then I'd go on these binges, and I'd drink, go into a blackout. And every time, because I was underage, I'd be arrested for public drunkenness, and they'd put me in those adolescent lockdown facilities. And every time, the big pink elephant is I'm put in those adolescent lockdown facilities, cussing like a drunken sailor, fighting cops. And within 24 hours of sobering up, it was always the diagnosis changed to kind of like emotional and mental disorders. Then I'd get out, go back to tennis, be good girl Tami again, and I'd always have to up the ante. Well, at 18 years old, I graduated that college, and I was on the dean's list all 4 semesters from 16 to 18. I won all kinds of awards for tennis for that college because good girl Tami, I can control everything on the outsides, not understanding that nothing outside me makes me drink. I'm spiritually maladjusted. I have a spiritual maladjustment, but I don't understand that. So I'm trying to constantly fix the outside world. Well, at 18, I received the Chancellor's Award from that college that gave me an opportunity to go to any one of 5 state universities. They gave me the list of the states and the universities, all really good ones. And they said for the next 2 years, if I played tennis for their tennis team and took a minimum of 12 units, for 2 more years, they would pay my tuition, my housing, my textbook, and all my living expenses. And guess what I did, guys? Right? I drank. Because the book tells us we have special skills, aptitudes, and abilities that we're able to not only build a bright outlook for ourselves, but for our loved ones. And then we pull the whole thing down over our head with a senseless series of sprees. And at 18 years old, my whole goal was to get to a good college team and then turn pro. And I made the goal. And you know what? At 18 years old, I was flippin' exhausted. I'll be 65 this year. I was more tired at 18 than I was now because I knew intuitively at some very deep level there was no way I can control and manipulate to keep bad girl Tami away. She keeps chasing me. She's running faster. I can't run fast enough. To heck with it, I quit. So for the next few years, I did what I really do best, which is drinking and bad relationships. And back in LA, back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, if you had blonde hair, blue eyes, tan skin, a white tooth smile, and a really good tennis game, there was a lot of places that you could hang out with older men. They were willing to pay my way, let me live the high life. So I'd hang out at the Malibu Tennis Club, and back then even Hugh Hefner's Scouts used to pay me and a couple of friends that were really, really good tennis players like $100. That was a lot of money back then when you're young. And we'd play at the Playboy Mansion. He'd have these celebrity matches. So I was always dressed, and no, I never saw the grotto. But he'd pay me to come and play tennis, and there'd be all these celebrities there. And that's the life I lived for the next, several years. Dropped out of college. All that's gone now. Tennis career's gone. Now it's just about showing off and playing pickup games. Anyway, during that time, I continued to live with my tennis pro boyfriend from 15. Now I'm in my early 20s. And he paid my tuition, and he paid my rent, and he took really good care of me. And we would make up, and we'd break up, and I'd cheat on him, and he'd throw me out, and then he'd take me back in that craziness we live in relationships when we're not sober. And that went on for a while. But during that time, I could tell that my boyfriend was like pretty much done. I'm like an albatross around his neck. And I got scared, so I did what the book says. It says, many of us swear off alcohol with or without a solemn oath. I'm always dramatic. I swear off alcohol with a solemn oath, and then, I throw the bottles away and hear the glass break. And I decide I'm going to go back to school, because when I'm in school and I've got structure in my life, I don't get into this kind of trouble. So I decided to enroll in college, this time 15 units. Maybe the 12 wasn't enough. And the tennis career is kind of over, so this time I decided I'm going to become a triathlete. So now I'm going down to a local health food store, and I want brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast, and I'm swimming laps, and I'm lifting weights, and I'm riding bikes, and, doing the same thing, expecting different results. And I cannot get a B, I have to get an A, because, see, I got to control the outside environment, because I'm in my early 20s, and now I know I'm crazy. And I've been in several lockdown units where they're verifying that I am not normal because of the abusive relationship I faced at the hand of my dad. And I know it. And so my goal in my 20s now is I know I'm crazy, and my goal is to make sure that you don't know that I'm crazy. So my whole life is a lie. Anyway, during that time, I met the man that later went on to be my husband, Dr. Rick. He was my husband for 21 years. And poor old Dr. Rick met me in a swearing off period. And I'm living next door with my tennis pro boyfriend, and Dr. Rick moved right next door to us. And he was wearing a triathlete shirt, and there's this tall, dark, handsome guy, and he's moving next door. And I saw him, and he saw me, and the sparks start to fly. And I sidled up to him, and I said, "Hi, I'm Tami. I'm your neighbor. Are you moving in next door?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I see you're wearing a triathlete shirt." And he said, "Yeah." And I go, "I'm a triathlete too." And he said, "Well, I just got out of a 10-year marriage, and I've moved here. I'm an OBGYN at Northridge Hospital." And he said, "Do you know a good local gym?" So the very next day, he and I are running a couple miles together, and then he's at my gym with me, and he's spotting me on weights. And every Wednesday, he had his Wednesday afternoons off his medical practice, and he and I would lay out in the condominium pool. Forget the fact that I'm living with another guy who's paying my rent. That's just an incidental. You know how we roll, right? And I'm playing footsies with Dr. Rick. Anyway, Dr. Rick met me in a swearing off period, and he had no idea. But one night, my tennis pro boyfriend came home, and he had some tequila. My tennis pro boyfriend was not an alcoholic. I believe he was a heavy drinker, but not an alcoholic. And he came home from work, and he had a bottle of tequila, and he poured some shooters. And I got into those shooters with him after probably about, I would say, at least 6 months of swearing off alcohol. And I call it to kill you if you're an alcoholic of my type. So I did this and the lemon, and next thing I know, my boyfriend and I are in a knockdown, drag-out physical fight the way we know how to be. Now, he would get physical with me, but I'm going to be very transparent. He was always trying to get away from me, and I'd block the doors, and I was the violent drunk, really. They used to call me Tami Tyson when I'm drinking. I'm only like 5 feet, but I've been known to knock a few men down to the floor. And anyway, Dr. Rick next door heard the fight. And he called the police because he heard me screaming and acting like the crazy person. So the police show up, and I'm sitting on the couch, drunker than a skunk, and I see my boyfriend talking to the police, and Dr. Rick is standing behind the police going, "Is Tami okay? Is Tami okay?" And my boyfriend eventually got rid of the police, and he got rid of Dr. Rick, and the police said a few words to me, and they saw I was okay. And then my boyfriend and I went upstairs, and did one of those all-night passionate makeups the way we do after we beat the crap out of each other and the police leave, like, "Oh my God, you're my soulmate, I love you," because we're so whack, right? And we spend all night professing our love to each other like a bad Hallmark card. And I wake up the next day and I think nothing of waking up, taking a little liquid makeup, kind of straightening up my face from the fight the night before, putting a backpack on my back, and going off to Cal State University, Northridge, like there's nothing wrong with my life. Because, see, the book tells us that after a while, a drinking alcoholic, we can no longer separate the true from the false. That after a while, the only life we come to understand is our drinking life. So I go off to school. And I come home about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, I'd been drinking the night before, so I'm hungover. I'd stayed up all night professing my love to him, so I haven't slept all night. I've been sitting in classes all day listening to like lectures and reading syllabi and doing assignments. My whole body physically hurts because we were physically hurting each other. And now it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon the following day, and I'm in the underground parking of this condominium complex that we live in. And I get out of my car and I'm walking toward the elevator, and my jaw is tight, my back is rigid, my body hurts, life hurts. I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm discontented, and I'm tightly wound. And I'm just walking toward the elevator, and all of a sudden a thought occurs to me. Liquid relief is just moments away. There's a huge bottle of vodka waiting for me on my kitchen counter. Now I start thinking about that vodka just walking toward an elevator, and my jaw loosens up, my back relaxes, I got a little kick in my step, and if you I haven't seen the vodka, I haven't smelled it, I certainly haven't tasted it. Thinking about a clear liquid that looks like this changed my whole demeanor. And if you identify with that, you're probably an alcoholic, because alcohol has a voice for us that it does not have for other people. And I'm in the elevator, and I go to push button number 3, and all of a sudden there's Dr. Rick right at the elevator door. So I'm trying to hit that closed door button, and his head wedges between that elevator door, and he walks into the elevator, and the last thing you want to do is get caught in an elevator with a guy that called the police on you the night before while you were in a blackout. And, prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and having a good friend, a good sponsor like Clancy, and having gentle men in Alcoholics Anonymous, like my friend Don or Lee or even my husband, I used to use a tremendous amount of foul language, a tremendous amount of inappropriate sexual attire and sexual humor to always keep, especially you men, like a little bit off your footing, so you could never just see how broken and scared I really was. So Dr. Rick gets in the elevator and he says, "Tami, you and I need to talk about what happened last night." So I pulled out the cussing street girl and I said, "You effing know what happened last night, man. You're the one that called the effing cops on me, and I don't want to effing talk about it." And instead of him doing the usual like, whoa, okay, it didn't disarm him. And he looked at me and he put his hands on my shoulders. And I realized, okay, that's not going to work. So I grabbed his silk Fastenal tie and I yanked his neck right into my nose and I nuzzled and I said, "My God, Dr. Rick, you smell so delicious." And that didn't back him up either. And he said, "Tami, I've really come to care for you." And he says, "You're such an enterprising, engaging young woman with so much potential," like we haven't heard that before. And he said, "But I can see you're struggling with something, and I want to help you, but I don't know what's wrong with you." And man, that's the worst thing you can hear if you're an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism and you don't know it. Because I know I'm crazy. And now I'm realizing that people are seeing through my facade, but for whatever reason, and today I do know it was the grace of God, I got off that elevator and I told Rick the cry of every drinking alcoholic. I told him about my dad. I told him about running away from home at 15. I told him about my older boyfriend, and I told him one day I'm going to finish my degree. And one day when I graduate college and get my degree, I'm going to get my own job. And one day when I get my own job, I'm not going to live with abusive men. And one day, because the cry of every drinking alcoholic is, look, I know my life looks a little whack, but I have a plan. And when that plan comes to fruition, every alcoholic has a plan, newcomer. It's never a good plan. That's why we need to be sponsored. But I broke down that night, and I cried for the first time, like the broken kid that I was and always had been. No more tough cussing Tami. No more I'm educated, I'm smart, bravado fake Tami. No more sexual Tami. I sobbed like the broken kid I was and always had been. And Dr. Rick held me. And to this day, I think that's probably one of the most intimate moments I had ever shared with a man up to that point in my life. Because not only did he hold me, but I actually felt comforted. And I went back to my condominium unit that night right next door to Dr. Rick's, and I never did pick up that drink of vodka. It was the first time in many, many months that I was able to go to sleep without drinking myself to sleep. But I woke up the next morning and I felt the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That fear that comes in 100 different forms, because another human being saw the broken truth about me, and I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about the role that alcohol plays in my life, and more importantly, the role I'm playing in the lives of everybody I know because I'm such a whack job. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And they don't have a girlfriend like Rose that I can pick up the phone and just say, hey, Rose, can we talk at my local AA meeting, or even across channels that we do here in AA. We tell people things here in AA that we wouldn't even tell a therapist. And I did the only thing I knew how to do. And I went to and I got that glass of vodka. And I poured myself vodka that morning at 9 a.m. and I plugged my nose and I downed it as quickly as I could. And it heated up my chest, and it produced that ease and that comfort. And then I came up, the only thing worse than a plan of an alcoholic is a drunken plan. And my drunken plan that morning is things weren't working out with my boyfriend and I'd been with him for 7 years. And I knew that rich doctor next door had a huge crush on me. And I had the key to his condominium because I used to take care of his exotic fish and plants when he would travel to medical conventions. And I could not stand the pity I saw in his eyes the night before as he looked at me. So I decided that I was going to move all my stuff into his condominium unit and move everything out of Dennis. And then I was going to get him between the sheets. And I was going to replace that image I saw of him looking at me with pity with admiration for Tami, the sexual goddess, right? That's smart. So I spent the day drunk moving. And, my boyfriend came home that day, and there I weren't after 7 years of paying my tuition, my college, really in some ways protecting me from my dad. In no way am I giving the message that I condoned what happened between he and I, but he suffered over that for the next 30 years, and he's probably one of my biggest cheerleaders today, that I got sober and was able to turn my life around, because when he saw me drinking, it destroyed him because he felt so responsible. I moved all my stuff out of his place, and I moved them all in, so he comes home one afternoon, and there I'm not, just everything out. Dr. Rick came home the same afternoon, and there I were, like all moved in. And Dr. Rick not only let me stay, but 3 weeks later, he walked me down the aisle and he said, I do. And the day that we said I do was the day that he qualified for Al-Anon, because his life was not the same. Anyway, look, I'm going to be really honest with you. I punished Dr. Rick for everything that my dad had ever done to me. And I punished him for things that older men had done that probably didn't have good boundaries or good, constitution themselves. And, Dr. Rick grew up in a horribly abusive alcoholic home. Dr. Rick was so bright that I think he also got out of his, crazy life through academia. He was so smart. He made it to high school at 12, college at 16, medical school at 20, and at 24 years old, Dr. Rick was an air flight surgeon at the tail end of our Vietnam War. Think about it. He was just 24 years old, sewing our boys' bodies up. Yeah, thank you. He sewed our boys' bodies up as a kid when they were being medevaced off the fields, blown apart, because he was a general surgeon before he was an OB, and that's how he served in our military. And then he survived a 10-year marriage, and he survived all of that. But just being married to me for a couple of years, he was stuttering and stammering and didn't even know his own shadow. Because I'm not a funny drunk, and I'm not here to entertain you and have you rolling on the floor. We hurt people. And hurt people. And Clancy told me my job at a podium of AA is to impress upon you newcomers the fatal, fatal nature of this malady we have called alcoholism, because it's not all fun and games. And I damn near destroyed his soul. And his biggest crime was that he really just cared for me, and I think in a lot of ways needed to do healing from his own family through me, and that was his thing, which he later did address in Al-Anon. Anyway, that marriage produced 2 children. Today I have a daughter, Chelsea, that's 30. I can't believe this. Can you believe this, Don? My daughter, Chelsea's 38. And my son, Alex, is 35. And through the grace of God, I was so physically sick with both those pregnancies. They're a year apart, so 35 and 36. I was so physically sick when I was pregnant, I couldn't stand the smell of perfume, coffee, and I couldn't stand the smell of alcohol. I had a condition called hyperemesis where I didn't puke the first trimester, I puked the entire pregnancy. So I'm 9 months pregnant with my daughter, puking the whole time. I gave birth to this beautiful little baby girl, didn't pick up a drink the entire pregnancy. 6 weeks later, I find out I'm pregnant again, this time with my son. Dr. Rick hates me sharing that because he's an OBGYN. You're supposed to wait like at least 12 weeks. And he goes, Tammy, do you have to share that? And I'm like, yeah. Anyway, I'm pregnant again, this time with my son, Alex, and I went another 9 months without being able to pick up a drink. I went 23 months without picking up a drink, and in that 23 months, I'm in this big 5-bedroom home with a pool, 4 cars in the garage, paid for, married to a surgeon. I have a 1-year-old baby girl, a brand new baby boy, and I wake up one morning and I feel the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, because I'm in this big adult world, and I got these 2 little human beings looking at me for something, and I'm so painfully aware that I'm a completely crippled human being. And again, I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear, and I picked up a drink. And the book says that many women in particular cross beyond recognition in a short period of time, and that was certainly my story. And I start becoming a daily drinker. Newcomers, if you don't believe that this thing is progressive, I didn't drink for 2 months, and I did not pick 24 months. I didn't pick up where I left off. That illness had really progressed. I have a girl that I sponsor that just went out after 6 years, and I mean, she's drinking like a vengeance because it progressed in her, even when she wasn't drinking. So now I'm a drunken mom, and I don't go to school, and I got a husband paying all my bills, and it got so bad that my husband had to hire a full-time housekeeper to stay home and take care of the kids because she can't count on me because I'm drinking and I'm causing a lot of problems. I get a felony DUI. It scares me. I try to come to AA meetings now as a mom and a doctor's wife, and I come to meetings with low-cut tops and high-cut shorts, and, I'm approaching you men, sexually because that's my only ammo. I can't grow up. I can't adult, let alone raise 2 kids. I'm not an adult. Things start to get really out of hand, and Dr. Rick starts attending Al-Anon meetings. And like any good alcoholic, I can't stand anybody threatening my way of living and my existence. So instead of encouraging him, I'd put him down like, oh, you're going to go to your let's all feel sorry for Dr. Rick harem, and they're going to all dance around you and pity you because you have your drunken wife. How nice is that for somebody who's trying to keep kids and a family together? And one day he went to this Al-Anon meeting, and I'll never forget, he came home and I'd been drinking. And he says, Tammy, you can go to a hell in a handbasket if you want to, but you're not going to take Chelsea and Alex and I with you anymore. And I saw something in his eyes, and I knew those Al-Anons were finally giving him a backbone to stand up to the insidiousness of me and my drinking. So I picked a fight with him that night, and I got out of the house and I went to the liquor store and I got a little 5th of vodka, and I sat in my car and I plugged my nose. I downed that vodka. It heated up my chest, produced that ease and that comfort. I got onto the freeway out in Los Angeles where I lived, and once the alcohol took effect, I saw a call box on the side of the freeway, and I thought it was a payphone, and I plowed that car into that call box, and 30 days later, this is my 2nd felony DUI, but apparently if you hit a call box, the lawsuit was the United States government versus Tami. Apparently that's a big deal. And 30 days later, I'm standing in front of a woman judge, and she's reading my rap sheet. Now, I've already been in 4 lockdown facilities, 2 as an adolescent and 2 as an adult, never once with a diagnosis of alcoholism, but all 4 times I was put in those places, twice when I was a kid for public drunkenness and twice as an adult for public drunkenness. But the minute we got into my childhood issues and I sobered up 24 hours later, it was emotional and mental disorders and those diagnoses that we can collect. So the woman tells me that I'm going to serve some jail time and that my rich doctor husband isn't going to buy me out of jail time on this one. However, she's going to waive 30 days of my jail time if I go into a lockdown unit for once for the diagnosis of alcoholism. And I went into that doctor's lockdown unit, and I told those doctors what I'd been telling them since I was 15 years old. I said, look, first I drank to feel good, then I drank to feel normal, and now I drink not to feel. And those doctors told me what they've been telling me since I was 15 years old. Tammy, you're clinically depressed as a result of your childhood with your dad, but none of these actions are your fault. Later, when I came to the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the old-timers had a new name for the effect that alcohol appeared to have on me, as described word for word in the doctor's opinion of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It turns out that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that I'd wake up in the morning and I'd see out of a blackout and I'd see broken glass, broken children, a broken husband, broken dreams, and I'd just go upstairs, turn the heating blanket up to Mom, suck my thumb, and think of ways to kill myself. And I had a feeble attempt at suicide when my daughter was 5. And my daughter was the one that had to call and get help for her mom. And in that lockdown unit, they told me that all my acting out behaviors were a result of the childhood abuse I faced at the hand of my dad from, 15 until I finally ran away from home, actually 12 till I ran away from home. And they said the best hope for me was medical management with antidepressants because I'm depressed. I can't handle life on life's terms, so something to help me with anxiety. And I can't sleep at night unless I drink myself to sleep, so something to help me sleep. But none of these actions were my fault. Later, when I came to the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous for a buck in a basket, the old-timers had a new name for a mother that tried to take her life in front of her 5-year-old without giving a crap how it would affect that little girl, my son, my mother, my husband. They called it alcoholism, selfishness, self-centeredness. The world revolved around Tammy's childhood trauma. Forget my kids are in their childhood. It's still always about me. In that lockdown facility in my swearing off periods, I used to take my husband's credit card and I'd go down to the local gym, work out with all you men, of course. And then I'd take y'all up to the pub after and buy drinks on his dime, lunch on the house, always playing the big shot, taking credit for money I never earned. And in that lockdown facility, they told me taking my husband's credit card to buy affection and love and attention from men was really my way indirectly of buying that love that I never received from my father in my childhood, but none of those actions were my fault. Later, when I came to the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, Clancy had a really fancy name for that one. He called it stealing. And not only did I steal my husband's money and play big shot on his dime while he's working around the clock trying to support our family, but as a wife and a mother of 2 small kids, I used to take the men that I met in those gyms to those daytime motels. And let's just say I did what drunken alcoholic women do in those daytime motels. My little kids are in like daycare and preschool and my husband's working. And in that lockdown facility, those doctors said that my dad gave me a script when I was a kid that my only worth was my sexuality. So acting out that script in those motel rooms really wasn't my fault. And later, Clancy had a real fancy name for that too. He called it cheating. See, by the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd been in 2 lockdown facilities as a kid, now 3 as an adult, to find out that living inside of me was this hurt child due to abuse and trauma and a lack of love as a kid. And for a buck in a basket, the old timer said, "No, kid, you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a thief, and you're probably just an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. And God, I needed it to be so much more." Young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a truth in these rooms that they don't tell you in the book, so I'm going to tell you a little secret. You don't like the old timers? Don't worry about it. You'll never be one. Our old timers are some of our most disrespected, untapped resource, and I'm not going to go on a pious pew up here, but I'm hearing so much stuff from the podium that has nothing to do with our program of recovery, and I'm grateful that I have always been under the tutelage of an old timer. For God's sakes, my husband used to say it every time he shared. Your very life is at stake in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Your very life is at stake. You're playing for your life. And don't go to a t-ball player to learn how to play in the major leagues. My husband always says, have a buddy system. There's a whole group of us, at Pacific Group. We're all sober 30 years and we've done this together. But our old timers had a lot of experience. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm so grateful to Clancy and now Pat. Why? Because to this day, they care more about my life than they do about my feelings. And they're willing to hurt my feelings in the name of my life. Anyway, the condition of my getting out of that lockdown facility is I have to start attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I come to meetings late. I leave meetings early. I wear low-cut tops and little Daisy Duke shorts. I was a lot younger then. People look at me like, ew. I took 5 of those 30-day chips. I'll never forget my last chip. I told everybody at my local AA meeting after I took my 5th chip about God and how great my life was, but what I didn't tell you is Al-Anon had rightly convinced my husband that he would be 100% responsible if I put those kids in a car and drive drunk again and kill them. They said, Rick, you wouldn't be 50% responsible, you'd be 100% responsible because she's incapable of making a sober decision. And what I didn't tell my local AA meeting is that Rick and the kids had moved out. And that I wasn't even living with my own family. And I got down off that podium, and I called my husband and said, can I please come home? I've got 30 days. And he said no, and I got angry, and so I drank at him. I came to 3 days later, and to this day, over 30 years ago, I have no recollection of what happened in those 3 days. But during those 3 days, apparently my mom and my husband and my sister had to call local hospitals and morgues because they didn't even know if I was dead or alive. And when I finally resurfaced, they had gone down to family court, and my mom and my husband had received temporary custody of my kids. I was removed from custody, and I had a restraining order on me that said that I could not come within 100 yards of my husband, his medical practice, our home, our children, or their daycare, and I had to go. And I remember calling Rick and saying, Rick, where am I going to go? And he said, I don't know, Tammy, but you got to go. And I asked him if I could just come and pick up some stuff. And he said, Tammy, you meet me at the house tonight at 7 o'clock. And he said, and I will just find a place to stay, get your stuff. And when you find a permanent place, I will send you money every month and I will send you your things. But for God's sakes, woman, just leave me and the kids alone. So I showed up at the house that night at 7 o'clock. And I hadn't been home in 3 days. I'd been out drinking. And I remember I walked up the stairs of that home, and I was literally a walking dead person. I remember this ringing in my ears, and my body was moving, but I was literally void of any emotion. No more plans, no more fight, no more explanation, no more BS. I was just dead. And I went upstairs, and I looked up, and I got my gym bag, and I threw some sweats and some T-shirts in his gym bag. And then I walked out in the hall, and my husband was standing, leaning on the hall, just looking down at the ground. And I just said, Rick, I know I need to go. I wanted to go. I knew I was hurting them, and I just said, I want to go. And I said, and I know I have to go, but would you please, could I just say goodbye to my kids before I leave? Would you give me that? And he said, Tammy, your kids have been through hell and back. They're 5 and 6 years old. He said, they're asleep in their rooms, and he said, I will let you look in on them, but for once in your life, Tammy, don't wake up your children. And on April 23rd, 1993, I grabbed my son Alex's door handle to his little bedroom, and I opened the door, and the hall light went right down onto my son, and he was asleep in this big pine bunk bed. And I'm really embarrassed to share this, but I want you to know that my son was 5, and I saw my son for the first time. The way a mom sees her child, I saw him. I didn't see me, I saw him. And he looked just like his dad. And he was so little. And I just started to walk toward the bed. And I looked at him, and something happened in my chest, and I felt this heat in my chest and this warmth. And I was mesmerized by this little kid, he was mine, he was my little boy. And I felt like this monster walking toward this angel. And I sat on his bed, and he opened up his eyes, and I reeked of alcohol. I'd been out drinking for 3 days, and my little boy took my hand, and he just started to rub my hand. And my 5-year-old, not my mommy, not my daddy, not my sponsor, not my therapist, my little boy said to me, Mommy, when are you going to come home and just be with us and not go away anymore? And in that instant, I was willing to do whatever it took. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And I know it like I'm standing here tonight. It wasn't my childhood. It wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the abuse. Everything that was going wrong in my life and now my kids' lives was over a clear liquid. For God's sakes, this is over a liquid. And I hit my son's floor, and I believe every alcoholic needs to say this for themselves. Don't say it for your sponsor. Don't say it for your rehab. Don't say it for your therapist, your mom, your dad. And I just said, God, please help me. And I left that night, and I had to sleep in the back of my home group, which was the hole in the sky. And here I am, a surgeon's wife with a 5-bedroom house, cars in the garage paid for, beautiful pool, getting ready to build a tennis court. And I'm sleeping in the back of this broken down van that this guy, Jerry Green, used to put back there for wet drunks that didn't have hotel money. And I slept in my puke that night, reeking of alcohol in the back of Jerry Green's van. And I don't ever think I felt more at peace because I was finished. I wasn't going to quit drinking one more time. I was finished. And I walked out the next morning, and this mean old timer, Cowboy Nick, that used to tell the guys he sponsored, stay the hell away from that blonde girl, Tami, man. She's bad news. He opened up the thing, and I didn't ask for a place to stay. I didn't ask for money. I had no explanation. I said, Nick, I just drank away my kids, my husband, my house. And I said, could you help me stop drinking? And that's what we want to hear. And he said, sweetheart, he goes, your arms are too short to box with God. Why don't you put your hand in ours and let us help you? And I grabbed his hand, and I have not had a drink since. Look. In those next few years of sobriety, I believe, very well sponsored, and I landed in a great group of people that I didn't know it at the time, because when you come into AA, you don't know who's who. And God, in his infinite wisdom, put me in front of people that definitely cared more about my life. And the first thing, like Clancy said to me, is, do you eat with that filthy mouth? Clean up your language. And so I made the mistake of telling Clancy, you know what, I'm going to work on that. And he said, you want to work on it, go to therapy. In AA, we do better. And he goes, by the way, quit dressing like a 2-bit whore. You're the mother of 2 children. And I said, but I don't have custody of them. He goes, I don't care. You're their mother. And, I remember 3 weeks later, Clancy said, I haven't heard you throw a swear word once in 3 weeks. And I said, you're right. And he goes, yeah, Tami, it's kind of hard to say MFer when you're wearing a dress and heels and dressing becomingly. And what were they trying to teach me? Alcoholics Anonymous is first we put the plug in the jug, and we have to learn how to be adults. And I learned how to become an adult. At 1 year sober, I received custody back of my children. We don't promise you that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And a whole bunch of people at my home group wrote letters saying that I was attending 3 meetings a day and doing what, is required to do for sobriety. And I received custody back of my kids. Right after my 1 year cake, I turned to my sponsor and I said, you know what, I've got 1 year, I got the kids back, I'm going back to school, and I just signed up for 15 units. And he's like, yeah, good, butthole, now go drop 11 of them. He goes, Tami, you're bodily and mentally different from other people. And he said, you know what, you want to go to school, you can do anything you want to do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have to do it sober. And you can't do it sober when you make your life so busy that you cannot participate in AA. So here's the way it works, kid. You schedule your life around AA, not AA around your life, right? And I can't tell you how many girls I've sponsored that got a year sober, and then they get the boyfriend, they get the husband, the wife, the kids, whatever, and the next thing you know, I can't make the meetings, and bam, they're back out there again. Listen, I'm not a bright one anyway. It took me 18 flipping years of going to school part-time in sobriety, but I stand before you guys. I not only have one, check this out, man, I have 2 master's degrees. Clancy said I am educated way beyond my intelligence, and I am. I can't even find my car at Costco, right? And guess what I just retired from? I've been a high school English teacher for the last 26 years, man. I taught your kids. I taught your grandkids. That should scare you. And I came in here cussing like a drunken sailor. And I taught your kids and grandkids the art of language. Check that out. Anyway, Dr. Rick and I became the best of friends in sobriety, and he's been one of my biggest cheerleaders. I met my husband Patrick in 2013. It's Dr. Rick's story, so I'm not going to go into it other than when I had 12 years of sobriety, he came home and he said, Tami, I'm leaving you for another woman. She's younger than you, she's prettier than you, and she's more fun than you. And I thought I was going to die. But see, I was so busy being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous that the same man that I abandoned in drunkenness, I went on to abandon in sobriety. And I want you to know that Dr. Rick was number one in my head. But I was too hyper to let it translate into actions, and I was always so busy thinking, I'm here with the kids and I'm here with AA, but I'm going to give Dr. Rick my time, and it didn't happen, and he met somebody else. And I had to walk through a painful divorce that I didn't want to walk through. It was during that time that I met my husband, Patrick. He had seen me come into AA. I used to try to flirt with him, and he wouldn't give me the time of day. And he talked to every other girl except me, and later when I got sober, he said, you know, Tami, you've really changed from a crazy little girl into a woman of AA. And he said, I know you're struggling. And he said, if there's anything I could do to help you. It turned out he was walking through a difficult divorce too. And man, we just went to meetings and we met for lunch and we became friends. And over time, we became a Boy Meets Girl on AA campus. And he and I have been together, and it took a long time because I wanted my husband back. And at one point, he even said to my husband, Rick, if there's any chance of you and Tami getting back together, I'm going to step aside because she wants her family, and what woman wouldn't want that? And Rick said, Patrick, you're such a better guy for her than I am, because Rick was all about work and medicine. I was all about AA, and we all became the best of friends. In 2013, Rick suffered from the side effects or the after effects of Agent Orange. He had been sprayed the military base that he worked in Vietnam. He was doing a surgery and he felt some back pain, but he had passed kidney stones a year before, so he thought he was passing kidney stones again. So they stabilized the patient, he scrubbed out and let the assistant surgeon finish the surgery, and he went home. Dr. Rick has never missed a day of work in 42 years. And as an OBGYN, it's hard to miss work because babies are delivered all the time. He left that Thursday, and on Monday morning, my daughter got a call, and they said, Mom, Daddy's medical assistants are looking for him, and nobody's heard from him or seen him for 4 days. And I said, Chelsea, something's wrong. She gave them permission as medical assistants. She said, go to where he lives and break down the door, do whatever you have to do to get in. Something's wrong. They got there. The lights were on. The TV was on. He wasn't responding. And by the way, the woman he left me for, nobody believes this. She was literally a worse alcoholic than I was. And he'd also been married twice before me, so Rick learned in Al-Anon that I have a compulsion to drink, and he has a compulsion for pretty little women who drink too much. So he's been able to address that. But they found him unconscious on the floor in full septicemia. He was fully septic, and he was not barely viable with life. They put him on life support. They called Patrick and I. We took the kids up, and they told us he's not viable with life. They just kept him on life support so that the kids could say goodbye to their father. I called Clancy in tears, and I go, Clancy, I can't do this. He goes, Tami, this isn't happening to you. That's the kid's father. Now, you put your big girl panties on, and you let your children go say goodbye to their dad. And I walked my kids in one by one. Chelsea was engaged to be married, and Rick was in a full coma, and we had to wear hazmat suits because he was so septic. And she just said, Daddy, nobody should have walked you down the aisle except for me. And she said her goodbyes. And then I took my son in, and he couldn't talk. He was just shaking and holding his dad's hand, crying. Then Patrick went in, and the nurses told us to tell him to let go, that it was okay for him to go. And he whispered in Rick's ear, and he said, Rick, he said, you take an Emmy and go on home for a life well lived. And he said, as long as I'm on God's green earth, I will never let anything happen to Tami or your two kids. Now you go on home and take your rest. And then it was my turn. And I walked in there, and I see this guy that saves me in every way that a woman could be saved. And he's laying in this bed, and I would have given my life in that moment. I said to God, why him? Why not me? And I just looked at him, and I just kept staring at him. And I went up to his ear, and the nurses said, Tami, give him permission to go. And I said, Ricky, I said, you can go home, and I want to thank you for everything you did for me. And I'm going to make you proud, and I will be there for your kids and one day your grandkids. And I said, and I got up in his ear, and I said, but for God's sakes, buddy, if you've got any fight in you, I will be there every step of the way. Rick didn't die that night. 15 days later, he came out of a coma. 5 months later, he was viable at least enough to go to a boarding care facility, and he couldn't talk anymore, but he could write. And he said he was so scared because everybody kept telling him to go. And he said, and I didn't know I was dying. And he goes, believe it to my ex-wife, Tami. He's always putting some kind of fire in my life. And on the day before Christmas, they called us, and they said, look, he's viable with life. I don't know that he'll ever walk or talk again, but you need to find him a boarding care facility now so that you can at least, be cared for, but it would be beyond anybody's ability to care for him because he couldn't walk or talk or anything. And I remember calling Clancy that day, and I'm looking at all these board and care facilities near our house, and I called him and I said, Clancy, what are you doing? Like, none of the options are okay. And he said, Tami, you do the next indicated thing, and you take the emotions out of it. Now go find him a board and care facility, and you visit him with the kids until the good Lord calls him home. But you do the next indicated thing and be a big girl. So I went and I arranged for this whole board and care facility, and when I came home that afternoon, my current husband, Patrick, is a contractor, and my entire cul-de-sac was filled with all his trucks. And all his guys were there, and they had gone into our home and gutted the whole downstairs, and they redid the whole bathroom with pulleys and special seats. He ordered a $6,000 hospital bed, and he said, for God's sakes, Tami, we take in drunks and let them get sober here. That's the kid's dad. And Dr. Rick moved in with us, and he lived with us for 6 years. And I want to say that he started to get occupational therapy, physical therapy. Those of you that know us know the whole journey. He was like down to 126 pounds. He started to learn to walk and talk again. And I want to tell you, through the love of a good ex-wife, and definitely Patrick's cooking, not mine, he thrived and he learned how to walk and talk again. Dr. Rick is still with us, and he no longer can practice OB, but he practices GYN. And, you know, my kids were always so grateful for that. They were grateful to Patrick. They were grateful to their mom. And then my mom ended up getting sick and on hospice, and Patrick and I were able to take her in for the last 3 years of her life. And man, we spoiled that little lady. I'd rub her little feet with peppermint lotion, and she got anything she wanted to eat. You know, for a little girl who came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone my own children, God in his infinite wisdom and you good people taught me how to grow up and be a big girl and stay out of the emotions and the drama and making everything about me. I was able to be there for my children. I was able to be there. Now we have 2 beautiful grandsons, and we moved to Northern California to help, you know, be there for our grandkids. I was there for my ex-husband, and we've been able to be there for my mom. And I can tell you, for me and the kind of guilty conscience I have, there would never have been enough alcohol to pour down my throat to absolve myself of some of the guilt I felt about what I'd done to my family. But because you people just let me sit with you for the last 30 years, I feel current. I feel at peace. I thank God for AA. I thank AA for God. Lee, I love you. Thank you for always being in my corner, man. And I thank each and every one of you. Thanks so much.